I'd like to invite the Prime Minister. Hear, hear.
Right, guys, just one more check. Am I audible?
Yeah,
Yay.
you're audible to me. Yeah.
Fantastic. All right, 3, 2, 1, go. Okay, let's just start for purposes of clarity, because it can often become a very messy debate, with a few examples of what kind of personal identity and actions we can talk about. Right? It can be in a very negative sense about like Clinton saying like, I did not have relations with that woman. It can be in a positive sense about someone making a lot of donations in their private life to charities. It can be about Obama being attacked by Republicans for his supposedly African roots and so on. Right? All those things can be kind of examples. And I think the key that we want to bring forward in opening government today is that it is actually not probably a net benefit or harm insofar as there can be good or bad examples of this. But I think it's probably in all instances a distraction from actual policies, and we're also going to give the alternative from when people actually focus on party ideals and more long-term ideals that they support. That is generally always a better thing than focusing on the short-term scandals and identities of individuals. Okay, 2 points of framing then before I start. 1, I think that all identities that we often see of politicians are usually kind of fake to a reasonable extent. That is to say, we kind of want to have, as individuals, the feeling of knowing celebrities. We want to have this feeling of getting in touch with people, right? That's also why a lot of people, for instance, follow, celebrities on Instagram and stuff, because they like to have the feeling of really knowing someone. But the problem is actually that we never really know people, right? Like when we learn about one scandal of one politician, of Bill Clinton, there's probably 100 other politicians that did the same things, we just didn't find out, right? So I think it's often very arbitrary and just comes down to the media happening to get this information, whilst many other people do very similar things. But secondly, and this is very crucial, panel, is that there's often very limited media attention or political interest in the first place for politics, right? I think, yes, maybe we as debaters like read many books or something on politics. I think the average person has very marginal interest in politics and usually only has a few things, maybe one conversation a day where they actually discuss things. I think that in and of itself means that at the point where we focus our attention on those identities, where we focus our attention on the wrong things rather than the policies, that is in and of itself a waste of attention and a waste of crucial, time for having good political discussion. Okay, so then onto our basically the main big argument, which has several parts, about why this is a distraction away from party ideals and why identity, basically in all instances, even with positive examples, is a bad thing. Okay, 3 independent mechanisms for this. Firstly, I think a lot of identity, specifically a lot of political actions that are being discussed, are often in the past. That is to say, scandals come up from the past and we learn, 10 years ago, Bernie Sanders voted for this, now he votes for that. Or, this is what Bill Clinton did 20 years ago. Like, I think regardless of whether those are good or bad acts, or maybe morally reprehensible, I think in and of itself, those things are very irrelevant. Why? First of all, I think change is good, right? The fact that someone did something 20 years ago doesn't mean that they now do the same things. Similarly, if people go to prison, they might have made a mistake, but if they come from prison, we also don't want those people to be suffering twice because they already did their sentence, right? I don't really see why what someone did in the past is often a good thing to take into account now. But secondly, as I said in my framing, I think a lot of those identities are often very fake or arbitrary. That is to say, the fact you find out about some person that something happened in the past, not about 10 other people, is just very morally arbitrary. And I think, therefore, giving sort of backlash for a certain politician or distrusting them because of something that just happened to come out in the media, whereas it didn't for 10 other people, is morally arbitrary and also distracts, therefore, away from actual relevant stuff. Second mechanism. I think also a lot of politicians tend to get away with things. That is to say, for instance, the Dutch Prime Minister, Mark Rutte, who is like charismatic in a very appealing way and actually gets away with many things. You see this similarly with Obama, who actually committed many drone strikes, even more than Donald Trump, yet a lot of people perceived him during his presidency and even now as being like a very peaceful person who didn't support war, whereas he actually killed most people of almost any US president in drone strikes, right? So I think the fact that people get away with those things because they give people the benefit of doubt, because they think such a charismatic, good person, when they say, oh, I actually didn't know about this, I actually never heard about those drone strikes, I don't know what you're talking about, they're likely to get the benefit of the doubt. And know that this is just like not an example. This is often the kind of mechanism politicians use when scandals come up, right? But they say, oh, I actually didn't commit those things. I never heard about this. I can't recall what happened 5 years ago. That is the way I actually often get away with those things. And I think at the point where people actually focus on the policies itself, rather than on giving people the benefit of the doubt based on their personal connection or feeling of charisma or feeling of liking the person as a person, I think that will be less likely in the comparative that people get away with such scandals, get away with, committing drone strikes, get away with things and just saying, I didn't recall, I don't know what you're talking about. But thirdly, and this is the third mechanism, right? I think that it distracts in general from the policies itself. That is to say, I think the most relevant thing for people is to vote in terms of their interests, right? To focus on ideals. Whether you're a Christian, you can vote for Christian policies. Whether you're an African American, you want to reduce police violence. I think those are things that are very crucial. And I think what often happens is that in of itself, this attention and focus on individuals takes away the attention, takes away the political discussion and discourse from the actual policies towards the individual itself. Okay, why is that a bad thing? Look, I think on the comparative, that the comparative is likely to be that the focus would have been more on political parties rather than on the individuals itself, right? That means that you, for instance, don't just align yourself with one specific politician or their personal identity, but actually focus more on the political party line in general. I'll take CO. CO?
Given that most democracies operate in functional two-party systems with a heavily dichotomized discourse, do you think individuals ever meaningfully change their mind on policy positions?
Well, I actually think so. You have a lot of swing voters between Republicans and Democrats. There's also many states in the world. I mean, apart from the UK and the US, basically every democracy in Europe has many parties. The Netherlands has like 15. I don't really think that's true. Okay, then, so what's then the comparative? I think we focus mostly on party lines, right? So that means that people will vote more ideals. That maybe, yes, sometimes a CEO says they might align with one party for a long time. If that's what their ideals are, I think that's great. If they want to switch because they feel the party has, the policies don't no longer support their interests, I think that's great. Whatever happens, however, is that now often, for better or worse, people focus on identity of individual. That means, for instance, they vote for someone because they are a woman. They vote for someone because they didn't make, a bad decision 20 years ago. And note that probably opposition will say, oh, it's actually great for progress, right? It's very great if people vote for women because we want female emancipation. We want people to vote because they're an African American. The problem, however, is this, that it also works exactly the other way around. That is to say, there's also people not voting for someone just because she's a woman. There's also people literally not voting for Obama because he was an African American and white supremacists who don't want to vote for him. So the more you make this an attention thing, I think it's as best as a wash, because some people vote because of this personal identity, some people vote against of that personal identity, but at the end of the day, all that happens is that people no longer focus on the policies that this individual is proposing, but focus on the identity and the actions of this individual. I think it's great we had Obama. I think it's great we have AOC. I think, however, it would be better if people voted for Obama because of his policies and not because he was African American. I think this happens in all instances, right? And I think because this maybe is a positive example, I think there's also many negative examples where people focus just on Trump because he's a white man and they think, oh, that's great, right? I think that is the problem. So I think on our side of the house, we actually create more meaningful political discourse. We focus on the actual policies, don't give people the benefits of doubt. Very proud to propose.
I would like to thank the Prime Minister and now invite the Leader of Opposition. Hear, hear.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're all good.
Cool. All right, give me a second. Gonna get rid of that sheet and okay. Cool. 3, 2, 1. Panel. Open and government kind of have a weird case, right? The start of the case, they explicitly say that, look, the political incentives or like necessarily that the information that you see isn't real. My question is, why does that matter? But secondly, the same logic is used that to say that no one ever knows who I am, so why should that ever affect those interactions? But here's some reasons and logical reasons as to why that is true. Firstly, they have a political incentive to allow you to get into their personal life so that they can see a degree of relatability and allow you to understand them and to like vote for them. But secondly, it's the same type of charisma that they talk about because they want to see a personal life and they want to get elected. More on that later, right? And the rest of the rebuttal will be flagged. I will integrate it, I will flag it. Okay, why do you have less information? And note that Open and government explicitly say that, look, politics is boring and it's never really reported anyway. 2 mechanisms as to why. Firstly, note that it's like focusing on newspapers, right? That's to say that it's counterbalance. So news media organizations often identify in status quo that it is really boring to get in politics, right? But no, what they do is they go into the personal lives of politicians. You see a politician and they have their Twitter or their Instagram and they bring you into their personal life. Like Jacinda Ardern bringing you in to see her family and welcoming you in. You feel a degree of relatability, and news media have an incentive to show you that, should show you that form of politics in that way, because note that that means that you feel engaged with it, right? the media on their side, and this is the burden they have to stand over, is that that doesn't happen. The media doesn't focus on it, and that most of the actions are focused on the political and policy outcomes that they want to talk about, right? But note that they have to bite the harm that less people get engaged in politics, less people are informed, and less people actually have an incentive to watch politics. It's not that I don't, it's like that they often just disengage from politics. Within that, 2 points within those mechanisms. Firstly, a principle. Secondly, practical. Okay, firstly on the principle. From the moment you're born, you live within a state. You cannot disengage from that state because there's only other states. So you cannot leave that state. Within that, there's 3 mechanisms that state controls every aspect of your life. Firstly, is the monopoly of violence. That is to say, if you ever take an act against that state or any act that goes outside of that law, that state has the ability to put you in prison. That state has the ability to use the army to remove all agency from you, right? That is to say that violence, you trade that agency off to get some certain value. But secondly, it's the monopoly of information. Note that the state often sets the curriculum for schools that often affect how children develop their brains and the information around that. Note that they form their crucial identity and how they assert themselves within that world. That information decides how they make decisions within that. But within that also, thirdly, it's the incentive structure. For example, states set how much tax you pay. States set how long it takes to be a doctor through things like regulation and law. That means that it affects how you, not only your identity, but your work. The very thing that underpins how you have wealth creation. That wealth creation leads to the fact about how you buy things and about how you express yourself and protect yourself, such as buying a home, such as buying healthcare, such as buying a car, and things to that extent. Therefore, how do you control this? There is one key mechanism that you control this. It is the vote. You use that vote, right? Why is that vote better, right? That vote is used to correct an asymmetry of power. So the state is meant to collect the aggregate preferences of people within that state. Note that if you the prior analysis that I give you within that is that people have less access to information. Note the key thing here is that information doesn't have to be good. I'll prove to you why it is good. But independent of that, within the principle, that information can be good or bad, right? Because that information within that context helps you to make a decision. So if the information is bad and you make a bad decision, we still think that is still a representative exertion of your preferences in the same way that a good decision is bad, because you have the agency to control and correct that asymmetry of power. People make irrational decisions, but that's fine. They should have the ability to make those decisions because not everyone is perfect in that. Therefore, that principle stands independent of the calculus. So it stands independent of opening government's burden pushing, but no accountability on war crimes or things like that, right? Because I think that's just nonsensical, and he will deal with that, right? Within that, there's practical. Okay. 4 mechanisms. Firstly, accountability. Look, I think that within private actions, and note that opening government define what personal identity is, but never define what private life is, because they clearly just want to shape the debate in their favor. Fair enough, right? But what do we think it is? I think it's like business interests. I think it's the acts that you make with business corporations by accepting sponsorship, accepting lobbying, and things like that. I think it's decisions that you made as a young child. Maybe it's you posted something bad on Twitter, but those things are still as legitimate as within that making decision. So therefore, I think that when you look at those private actions or media report on those private actions, or at least you yourself as an individual can see those private actions now with the fact that you're more engaged by looking at politicians. I think that means you can see whether they accept money or not. I think that makes politicians acting better in your interests, and looks like things such as being lobbying not being as effective. Because on the comparative, if it's just on political decisions, then it's if people aren't engaging as much, then they don't necessarily give a shit about what decision you make. So it just means that lobbying is far more powerful and more potent and is less representative of people's decisions. But secondly, on less barriers, right? Look, I think that in status quo, not status quo, on their side, you have to compete with parties. Why? Because note that these parties often mean that you'll have connections in university. These people who represent the big party will be wealthy elites. They'll go to the same universities. They will create relationships. But secondly, they often go to similar schools, similar private education, similar things like that. The reason that this happens, though, is because on our side, at least you have the ability to overcome that. How? Firstly, you let people come in and understand a degree of relatability. I don't give a fuck if someone passes an economic policy that does not represent me, versus when I can see a politician like AOC saying I'm a working class bartender who has suffered at the face of this shitty political system, then I think it's legitimate that you then vote for them, that you are empowered to vote and want to vote more. I think that CG, go.
Yeah, I mean, we can pretty much concede everything you've said until the point where you prove to us why this is useful information for people to make votes.
Well, no, we don't need to do that, Marisa. I've already listened to my first point, please. Yeah, anyway, right. Look, within that, why less barriers. Look, I think that means that you can make better decisions, you get better outcomes. Okay, uninforming votes. Look, I don't think you're necessarily economically literate in all things, right? So this probably deals with Maurice's POI. So the information is objectively good, regardless of what it is, because of the fact that you don't often understand economic policy, because you don't have an economics degree, versus that you can understand a politician talking to you, and that helps you make that good decision. And on political interactions, look, I think you see the personal lives, and I've already analyzed this. But what are the impacts of this? Look, I think you vote less. I think you feel less represented. Note that this underpins everything open government say on accountability, because it derives from the fact that they want people to vote and they want people to hold politicians accountable. But if people don't vote and people aren't engaged in politics, then how do they hold them accountable? Within that, at the point where you get more people from working class or like minority groups elected in politics, I think that more people vote. More people then feel welcome and are likely to engage in politics within the future. Note that that just transcends. Okay, beg you to oppose.
I would like to thank the Leader of Opposition and now invite the Deputy Prime Minister. Hear, hear.
Right, can I get my timer a second?
Mhm.
Thank you. Cool. 3, 2, 1, start. Look, Jack's entire case is, or at least the 3 minutes of it that were comparative, were contingent on the idea that the persona that we see in politics is also the real persona that that person actually is, and therefore it's legitimate to vote on that person. But second, that the idea that you vote on a persona is a good way to make a decision, and that the only alternative is not making a decision at all. I think that's wrong. A couple of points of framing. 1, look, we have to say that it's bad that we focus on these kind of identities. I still think it is legitimate to say that the moment where you are a member of parliament and you committed huge forms of fraud or massive adultery on your wife and you are just completely messing up your media relations, that you can be removed from that parliament or people won't vote for you anymore because they just think you are disgusting the moment where it gets out of hand. I think what we are defending is that we regret, like we would rather not have happened, the fact that currently a lot of these things are indeed like AOC posting her entire life on Twitter or about any form of parliamentary member, trying to build an entire persona just to get the goodwill from the people to vote for them. I think that is a narrative that is dangerous for a couple of reasons. Rebuttal on Jack, before I go on into what's the alternative and why that alternative is better. 1, oh, but it's good because now you actually trust a person and it is good that you actually put trust in your politician. 1, I think that could be true. I think there are other reasons why politicians could be trusted, but mostly I think that trust is constructed. Politicians have huge communications offices that try to build a persona. Trust me, I ran one. It's really, really fucking complicated. They are probably exactly noting what you should post on your personal Twitter and what not. I monitor one of them. A lot of things I post about the minister is really not what she's actually doing, but it works for her followers, and therefore you create that. The moment where you focus on a persona is the moment where you don't focus on the person ideas, but you only focus on how to build or keep up that kind of persona. Let's just say I would love to vote for AOC if she would actually be a working class woman, but if you really look at her background, you know that a lot of things are also exaggerated or framed very nicely in the media, and I think that that's bad. 2, why that focus then is bad and the alternative is that we don't vote at all. This is where our own material comes in. Look, I think that the alternative is that we would vote on party lines rather than on people. I think that there's a good way to also promote parties or to have a stereotype about what a party entails and therefore vote for those kind of things. For example, in the Netherlands, you have the Liberal Party that is known for typical kinds of policies or stances that you can promote just as well in order to get people to be engaged, because the moment where something is happening, you can say, but we have a typical stance on this on it. I think that in parties, it also means that when you vote for the Green Party, you actually vote for green and leftist policies. Whereas what happens now, for example, in the Netherlands, is that the Green Party leader is kind of the Dutch Trudeau, who has a typical immigrant working class background that he tries to uplift his persona, and that's what people vote for. And I think that that is the alternative that we do instead of his party and the party lines that he is doing. Cool. Why do I think that way of is important? Why would I rather have a focus on party? And why do I think that's likely that that's the replacement? 1, why it's better. Look, currently we focus at people's persona. That means that we focus on what we think that person is or represents. That is to say, the moment where you have a persona because you're an immigrant or you're from a working class or you're, on the other hand, you are a white-skinned, privileged person who talks very intellectually or very rationally, you appeal to people who like to identify with that and feel safe. Specifically because we live in a time where politics are often seen as scary, that is something that appeals a lot to people. That means that you're likely to vote for that kind of person, even if they represent a party that has very different stances than the thing that they actually are. I think that that is worse for a couple of reasons. The image that you need to have here is that you vote for a woman that is quite outspoken because you want more outspoken women kind of policies in your system, but you don't vote for the party that actually supports more women rights. You vote for the women in the party that actually doesn't. That is what happens when you focus on identity politics, that you're going to assume forms of identity with people that probably have nothing to do with the ideas that they put forward. Because it doesn't really matter from which country or which ethnicity you have in the way that you think. It doesn't matter in which clothes you wear, in what kind of policies or ideas you think, but that is what people are going to associate. What I think is the alternative is if you portray a stereotypical form of the party or a party line that people can associate with. As to say, you probably fall in line not with what your own identity is, but what your party's identity puts forward. Why do I think it's better? Look, under both cases, it means segregation, or at least a form of segregation from people who vote for it. Either because you vote on a particular person and then you don't make that a good way of, or you vote for a party because you identify more with the party and then you become more segregated. That happens on both sides. But at least with a party, you vote for party lines, and party lines at least entail a form of policy. I think that's better for two reasons. One, you vote for something that is actually likely to get done, because a party probably has the political capital to get the kind of policies through that you probably want to get to see through in the first place. But two, you vote for the actual idea that the party wants, or the stance or the line that the party wants for the future for your country or for the future for your neighborhood. And I think that that is more important because that is something that I'd rather have you think about. But as long as there are people, or as long as the rise focusing on identity still exists, you probably focus more and more on the typical blouse that a person wears and the way that that makes you feel. And I think that that is worse. Therefore, I think that that is something to be regretted, because the alternative is that you would have engaged more with ideas. Even if those ideas or parties then become more ingrained, I think the things that parties put forward on the comparative is still better than the identity politics of people. Second, I think that even if you only go for the standard case that Jack likes to attack, and that's to say, we think it is good because these people are actually true, or even if you deny everything that I just said, I still think that for opposition specifically to focus on the personal life of a person and attack someone on that is to play on your emotions and actively try to drift your attention away from what is going on and what the ideas are that a person has. I think that's a bad way to criticize politicians, and I think that's a bad way to rip them off power. I do think it's a zero-sum game. I don't think people don't care at all about politics. You probably want to know what is happening. You probably want to know what you are voting for. But I also think you have particular feelings in how that happens or what you are voting for. I think therefore you are, the moment where you start playing on those feelings and setting up a certain persona and try to relate to a typical kind of voter or people, you play on the things that you don't want to play. That's why I think it should be regretted, because there is space to focus on ideas, but those ideas need space and they need to be put forward. And now they're always outcrowded by the idea and persona that we're setting up. I'd rather have people focus on party lines, stereotypical party frames, but at least the ideas and the actual policies that the party is putting forward, than on the way that a minister dresses, or the way that the opposition leader speaks, or the way, or the ethnicity or the skin color that you have, and therefore you identify with certain people, because I think that's a bad metric for people to make choices on. For all these reasons, I think comparative is better on our side. Please propose.
I would like to thank the Deputy Prime Minister and now invite the Deputy Leader of Opposition.
I've got a lot of sheets. Can people hear me?
Yeah, I think you're good.
Lovely. So it's going to be a standard structure from Deputy. First of all, I'm going to discuss their case, then I'm going to discuss our case. But before I start, I'm just going to do some top half weighing why I think, before I've even started my speech, why I think we're already winning this top half. First of all, we got no response to our principled analysis when Jack specifically explains to you how at the point in which you have less information informing someone's vote, a principle is breached. This is independent of whether or not this information is good, because it's the very fact that you're limiting the amount of choice a person has over their vote is when principle is breached. Because recognize, every time you enter the ballot box, you are not voting for Jeremy Corbyn, you are not voting for Boris Johnson, you're voting for how you perceive Jeremy Corbyn or how you perceive Boris Johnson. This is shaped by the media and it is shaped by the information you have at hand. So at the point at which you are denied information that you yourself may think is relevant to you, that means a principle is breached. It doesn't matter if that information is important or not. At the very fact that you cannot access information which you would like to decide to vote, it means you cannot choose how to decide things. I think one of the panelists is connected. That's sad. Okay. Second reason in top half why we're still winning. We actually link our practical analysis to how individuals will act in their office, in the sense that, first of all the information we have tells you how having this information means that voters can understand your incentives, so they understand if you'll be a good representation. But even if that's not true, we tell you how you feel more represented, because first of all, you buy into the system more, second of all, you feel better of that. Attacking OG's actual analysis then. The first thing they say is how this information is bad because this identity is fake. The first thing they say is that politicians will just control their own Twitter accounts and therefore you're not getting the right information. It's true that politicians control their own info accounts, but recognize that politicians also have opponents who will then check them by providing information on their past. This looks like a Democrat saying to a Republican, you should not represent people because you spent 30 years as a banker, you are a member of the NRA. This is valuable private information which will inform your incentives and who you actually represent. So this means that the information will probably be good. Second of all, the media has an incentive to get a scoop, to get an exclusive on the past of a personal information. That's why it's going to be good. The next thing they say is that the information is going to be bad because people have marginal interest in politics and therefore there's a large opportunity cost. We think, first of all, given that there's literally 24-hour news cycle, the main thing trending on Twitter all the time is news about politicians, we think you are likely to see a lot of this information. We don't know why you can't see both. But second of all, even if people do have only a marginal interest in politics, we think during an election time, they probably do have quite a large interest in politics. So it's like 60 or 70% of people will vote in any given election and 80 to 90 people will consider voting in every single election. We think you probably do get a lot of information. But also secondly, even if an opportunity cost could potentially exist about how much news you would be watching, because you are likely to be drawn in by this sort of information, because the reason this focus has existed is because people are interested in this information, at the point at which you are now more likely to listen to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez because you are swayed by her story of growing up as a working class bartender, this means you're likely to now further go on and access information about policy. So that's a unique mechanism on our side how you get more access to policy. Next thing they have is 3 mechanisms why this information is irrelevant. They say, first of all, that change is good because, you should forgive someone who has served their time in prison. I don't think Joe Biden supporting racist laws in the 80s is akin to prison, given that they've never been punished and they've never actually faced time. I think if we're going with that analogy, I think you should punish them by not letting them be president. I also think, given that voting is a comparative mechanism in the sense that you're not just voting on if you like Joe Biden, you're voting on if you prefer Joe Biden or Bernie Sanders. I think it is very important to note that in the 1980s, before they ever even thought about the short-term political incentives and becoming president, Joe Biden voted for a racist law and Bernie Sanders in the exact same Senate didn't vote for that racist law. I think that is irrelevant because it speaks to their values, it speaks to their incentives, and it speaks to how they're going to act when they're not under the scrutiny of trying to win votes. It speaks to how they're going to act when they just have power and are going to wield it. Second of all, they say politicians will get away with things because they just seem charismatic. Listen, I think first of all, politicians can just use another distraction if they want to get away. For example, Obama doing drone strikes. This looks like Trump just making up a new inflammatory tweet to distract people. But also, I don't think this actual distraction works in the sense that Obama had a lot of personal attacks on Republicans and Republicans still didn't care about these drone strikes. So I'm not sure about the mechanism. But also I think that fact that you now have an opposition making personal attacks, you now have more accountability. The last thing they say is that voting takes things away from discussion because you're going to vote for the wrong people. I've got a lot of responses to this. First of all, I think probably you're more likely to buy into politics because of the reasons that Jack tells you, at the point at which you're going to be more bought in and feel more represented by the process. Second of all, they say that you will vote for the wrong identity. Race people only vote for rich white people. Recognize that they give no mechanism how poor people can actually influence voters. So even if this mechanism exists on both sides, at least we have mechanisms now poor people can use their identity. Third of all, we say that it is an individual good that people can judge someone's values. So this looks like when Warren and Warren and Sanders have the exact same manifesto points, you can tell whether or not Warren is lying by looking at their past and see that Sanders actually is true. So this means that when people are focusing on policy, they'll have no idea if Warren or Sanders will be a better representation. But by looking at the past, by looking at the track record, this means you can actually inform your vote. Fourth of all, they say you're not going to look at parties anymore. First of all, I think you still probably do look at parties. Second of all, I think it's like their characterization of like a conservative party is going to push more women. It's just not true and not how it works status quo. But second of all, I just don't think it's any likely. I'll take closing now.
Cool. How important is the size of a candidate's penis in their sex tape for my vote?
Obviously, now respond to that. This is not legitimate engagement from CG. They still have a massive burden to take points from us because they're not engaging with us in top half. What do we give to you? First of all, a principle. We say that a principle is breached at the point at which the state has massive control over you, and the only way to control this process is to choose your own representation. This means a principle is breached whenever you reduce the capacity of individuals to decide what their represent is. This is independent of outcome. I'll give you an intuition pump. Even though China and Russia are like managing their economies very well, we still think it's not legitimate for them to deny people votes, because we think no matter about practical outcomes, we think people should have a say in how they decide. So we think therefore, because the media is probably going to have less scrutiny and politicians are going to talk about their identity less, because you have less personal information on a person, which may be relevant to some person subjectively, this means you breached an important principle of democracy, and your democracy is now illegitimate. That's important. Why do we give good? Why is this practical information though good? Probably engaging more with closing. I think that's the point at which, first of all, you have more accountability, so you can see who they care about in their private life. Second of all, you allow working class people to get into politics by showing the barriers and allowing them to have a story. Third of all, when you don't understand the difference between trickle-down economics and Keynesian economics, you can understand persons' incentives by their politics. Fourth of all, you feel represented, you feel a personal link to their politics if you say they're a woman too. So proud to oppose.
I would like to thank the Deputy Leader of Opposition. Just before we move on, I just want to confirm, Nicholas, you're back. It's all good.
Am I audible?
Yeah, you're audible, Maurice. Just good to go whenever.
3, 2, 1. I think this debate in the opening half is weird because no one in this debate has asked a very simple question. What do the voters care about? Should they care about the hypocrisy that is often embedded in politics? That is a very simple claim we're going to make in closing government. But it's not only this. We're going to do like 3 things. The first thing is I'm going to just, instead of saying opportunity cost, explain how it manifests itself in political discussion and explain to you why it necessarily means that opening opposition does indeed have the burden of proving to you that the information that they give to the people is actually useful when it comes to them making their votes. The second thing I'm going to do is explain to you what matters when it comes to individuals voting and the impact that it has on political discourse insofar as it creates further identity politics and oftentimes creates like very cheap tactics on that discourse. And the last thing, I'm going to run a bit of a principle on access to politics and why we think that arbitrary characteristics should play no role in that. So on the first one, opportunity cost. I think it always exists and it manifests itself in multiple ways. It does do it in the airtime thing, but it also has to do with the time of voters, the attention span of those voters, right? What they actually will care about. Even opening opposition tells you that fundamentally these are sexier topics, which these individuals are far more likely to care about and that they might get interested in. What I think crucially then matters is to understand that at the point at which there's a scarcity of resources, the type of information that we allow to reach the voters in order for them to make a decision should be the ones that are most useful. They never prove to you that this information is useful. Their principle is literally information is good. We give people more information that is necessarily good. It is unclear to me why it is that the right to information is an absolute good, especially at the point at which it comes at the cost of information that might be more useful. That is, for example, the comparative that is set. That is, for example, the fact that these are actually individuals that are like the politics and the actual policies that individuals follow. So I think opening opposition is just out of the round insofar as they deny their burden that exists in this debate in a POI in the LO. The second thing they say is that we increase interest in politics. I'm not particularly sure how healthy that interest is, how important the voters that are only driven into politics by the fact that the individual drama exists is important. I'm not sure if these are good voters or individuals that I would care much about losing on the comparative. So I think that's on opening opposition. So what do individuals and what matters when it comes to voting in politics, right? Like I recognize that a lot of the time it's going to be personal drama. It's going to be stuff like that. but I'll take opposition at their best. I'll give the example of Biden, or I'm going to give you the example of a hypothetical politician who has dementia or something that actually is very important and that you might link quite easily to their efforts in office. I'm not sure why we should still care. Insofar as at the point at which we vote for that politician, what matters is the outcomes of their actions. What matters is the outcomes and the policies that they adopt. The process through which those policies has been adopted is entirely unclear, bearing in mind that the reason why you vote for politicians is for them to represent you. If they represent you, anything in the process between your vote and their representation of you, that is the policy that they choose, shouldn't matter. And that is the example for this would be, for example, World War II and the pro-feminist movement. What was labeled as the pro-feminist movement, which was basically getting women to work out of necessity, was fundamentally hypocritical to claim that it is a pro-feminist movement by politicians. Definitely a lie. But what matters is that the outcome was good, and that this is eventually what matters in politics. As long as people are represented and we get some type of progress, we don't care as to how that progress has come. And I think crucially, they never do anything in opening opposition, and that's a big window for CO to come in and talk about this, as to why it is that this information is something that should matter in the political process. What I care about as a voter is my personal interest, and at the point at which that personal interest is satisfied by an individual who might have like a personal agenda or whatever, I'm not sure as to why I should care about that if it means that, you know, my life gets better. So on that consideration, I think that the opening half in this round is probably not as important, on the grounds that they've never talked to you about what people should care about and what people do care about. Then, secondly, what do we think about access to politics? I think crucially what this motion does is that it oftentimes prevents individuals from actually joining politics in the first place. That is to say, in a quite conservative state, being a homosexual can often be considered a death sentence for your political campaign, right? At the point at which people focus on that political identity, and after that, at the point at which media pick up on this, no one cares about your political career. But here's the thing, right? If someone lies about their homosexual identity, for example, it is the focus on personal agenda that the opposition supports that would eventually lead to them being smeared again. And as a result, they would still have no opportunity. But note, secondly, what that means is that a lot of the time what you do is that you select the ability of individuals to represent you in office, you select the ability of individuals to do so on the basis of entirely arbitrary characteristics. That is to say, things that they never chose, whether or not they were born into a privileged family, whether or not they were born into a poor family too. Like, these are the types of things that people often use in politics. We think that they should make no difference whatsoever because we think access to politics should happen on a level playing field. They will respond for sure that, you know, the accident of birth and arbitrary characteristics will exist anyways. We think that the response to this is very simple. Arbitrary characteristics exist in the status quo. We do things like welfare, however, because we realize that we should minimize the impact it has on the lives and opportunities of individuals. That is the reason why generally we try to minimize it. We don't make it worse. The third thing I want to talk about is about discourse, because everyone talks about this as in so far like, oh, you know, the people are going to think about this and maybe they vote or maybe they don't vote for X individual or whatever. Before I move on to explain to you how exactly it impacts politicians' behavior with each other, as well as the way that they set up themselves as politicians, I'll take opening up.
Okay, so we gave you 4 reasons why you can increase accountability, reduce barriers to access, and feel represented. Are you going to engage with these reasons or just straw man and claim we didn't engage in a practical clash?
No. But here's the thing, right? This is contingent on you proving that the accountability that is created based on that information you've never proven are useful is something that we want. Maybe you have 4 mechanisms, maybe you have 3, I don't know. Prushemek will pick up on it and explain to you why they're all wrong. So, discourse. I think discourse is fundamentally something that has changed. Insofar as politics now become personal, insofar as you get things like smearing campaigns, insofar as when you get debates, it eventually becomes an ad hominem kind of clash where people talk about their past instead of talking about their policy. The opportunity cost there is quite clear, which is time, which means that individual voters do not get access to that type of information that might be more useful, or that the one that we consider to be more useful. But also note, this is great grounds for populism, right? Politicians often use their personal identity and they adopt it and internalize it in order to take votes. That is to say, they go out and they say, look, I'm homosexual, I'm going to represent you. But instead, they have no policy whatsoever other than that. It looks like Tsipras going out saying, I'm a poor guy and I'm running against Mitsotakis in Greece, who is a privileged man from a privileged family that is basically a political dynasty in Greece. I'm not sure why all that should matter when it comes to individual voters. But unfortunately, they do, because it's what sells and it's what's sensationalized by the media. This is a deeply regrettable reality, and one which skews the democratic process in a way that closing government will not stand by. Thank you.
I would like to thank the member of government and now invite the member of opposition. Hear, hear. I would like to thank the member of opposition and now invite the government whip. Hear, hear.
Cool. Am I audible?
Yeah, I think you're good.
Wonderful. Okay, starting in 3, 2, 1. Panel, there is nothing shiny about our extension, I'm not going to lie, but we're the only one team that actually explains a very crucial element of this debate. This is to say that we believe you cannot win such a motion when you are assuming and taking for granted that this or that metric for voting is something that is ultimately beneficial, valuable, and important. We win this debate because we are the only one team that actually takes effort in explaining why it matters that people should vote according to politicians saying things that are full of shit, but at the end of the day, realizing some of these things rather than their personal identity, their private lives, all of this other information that might be influential in how you see politicians and might be even meaningful for your political vote, but at the end of the day, it's working against your interest. That is the one part of our extension that I think is very important. The other part of our extension that is very important in understanding why we win this debate is this. Even if it doesn't matter, and you actually believe that choices should be based on, like either policies or personal identity, regardless of which version of the world you believe in, all choices matter only insofar as you have someone to choose from. Our principle explains why the access should not be constrained by as few factors as possible, and why this motion actually constrained the access to politics by quite a lot of arbitrary characteristics. So we have two extensions that are logically separate from each other, and both of these extensions logically win with all the other three teams. I'm going to do three things in my speech. Firstly, OG, then CG, then OO, then CG. When it comes to OG, a large element of their case is premised on this shift towards the world in which people vote on party lines and policies. Note that some of the reasons they give are not comparative, e.g., focusing on the past voting record will happen anyways, as this is not a part of personal identity or private action. It is actually an element of one's policies and how they have evolved. But we are the ones that fully explain why this shift actually changes, what actually happens. The reasoning as to why this is true is that this information is always going to be more sexy, more catchy, always going to weaponize the attention span that voters have. That is important because all the other analysis that comes from the opening government cannot work if they don't explain what is the relationship between one kind of information and the other kind of information. This is what Maurice's does. This is what Maurice's speech does in his first minute. But second of all, none of the OG claims can stand without the explanation why voting on policies matter. And the intuition pump that I want to use here is this. If you want to throw out a highly conservative president, such as the one that we have right now in Poland, if you are the pretendant to this office, you need to lie. You need to cater to the electorate that is ultimately going to vote for you for the wrong reasons. But the goal that you have in mind is something that is important. You need to be full of shit in order to have a good policy, in order to have a good politics. And this is the reasoning as to why you actually should prioritize focusing on policies, not the fact that the policies in and of itself are going to be always internalized by voters as something that is, super clear and crucial when it comes to making an informed decision, but rather that this is a prerequisite to having politics that actually fulfills the interest. Therefore, the case of the opening government is contingent on ours. Also, our principle stands regardless of this actual shift to focusing more on politics, because what happens before that is that some individuals are deterred from entering politics in the first place if they do not believe that this is something, if they have some arbitrary characteristics that are basically constraining this access. So we are also above them in that sense. Going to the opening opposition. Maurice already said that this principle is literally, it is fair that you should have access to information because information matters. But there is a number of problems with this generic idea being applied to this motion. First of all, it is clear that the principle of democracy does not require people to have all information. The penis example is probably a good one. But importantly, we do not disclose information even if it might help people in making the political decisions. When a politician was beaten in his childhood or sexually abused, it might have an influence of his actions no smaller than religion, sexual orientation, or even business activity. But nonetheless, we do not require politicians to disclose this information because this information might be very detrimental to their private lives, to other values that actually matter. They never make it clear. The opening opposition never makes it clear why the focus on this information that they describe is crucial, standing aside from the fact that they also have never explained why the trade-off that we are making with this is something that is justified. Second of all, if this principle is obviously fully contingent on the practical outcomes, namely on which side of the house you have more relevant information provided, and also not only relevant information, but the one that fulfills this trade-off between other values and democratic choice, as I have already proven, which means that on our side of the house, we actually fulfill this principle to a greater extent because we prove that you have more information that is relevant, because more people in politics are not being deterred from accessing politics, you have less populism, and the quality of discourse is also higher. Lastly, when it comes to the opening opposition, if people get interested in politics because of personal scandals, we do not care. Two reasons. First of all, note that even if private information is anyhow useful, e.g. a politician being full of shit and doing something entirely different in his private life, it is only useful insofar as you can weigh it with all other factors. We think it is incredibly unlikely that you will be able to weigh it with other factors if what pushes you into politics is this sexy, catchy information, being put into your limited attention span about a private scandal. They need to prove that as well in order for the argument about the general benefits of getting more people in politics to stand. And also, even if they prove that, note panel that they have never explained to you why the marginal change of having, 5% more people in politics is something that is so important in this debate. Quickly on CO. So I actually agree that, yeah, probably personal identity is being a motive. Personal identity is something that motivates people to vote. But this is the reasoning as to why populists win as well, because minorities would gain from the focus on personal issues only if they had equal ability to create this persona that OG talked about. Nigel Farage drinking a beer in Wetherspoons doesn't make him a working class man, but for some people, unfortunately, it does, because he has money, he has the ability to conduct research, political experience, the access to media, to actually know how to spin his persona as a persona of a working class person. Always, in the best case scenario, you will have some minority politicians using this to their advantage, but also more populists hijacking this discourse. CO did not explain why this trade-off is worth making. Thank you very much.
I'd like to thank the government whip and now invite the opposition whip.